If you struggle with addiction and relapse, this video is for you. Hey everyone, if you've been to my channel before, welcome back. If you are new to my channel or my videos, my name is Ross and I'm an intuitive counselor. Today I wanted to talk about relapse versus slips. And I know in my videos I have not talked a lot about addiction. I've been focusing a lot on other topics, but I spent the last 7 years actually working in different roles in treatment centers, and it's certainly a part of what I offer in terms of supporting people with their addiction. And so much of addiction, I believe, is about addiction actually being a symptom of many other things. And if you've watched my videos before, you know I talk a lot about emotional trauma and the experiences we've had in our life, both in our childhood experiences and then going on in our relationships, and just simply the struggles that come along with living life here on this planet and the experience of being human. And the thing about addiction is that at its core, and I really believe this, that addiction is solving a problem. In other words, there's a problem going on in our life that we are unable to find a solution for. And addiction, be it alcohol, drugs, food, compulsive shopping, all sorts of other things, whether it's, spending so much time on your phone, it's a way of disconnecting from what's going on in our lives and feeling, even just for a moment, some relief of the feelings that go along with that feeling of disconnection, and it serves a purpose. And even if it is causing, more problems in our life, it's somehow becomes worth it. And the pleasure that we get from these addictive behaviors often override the um, the implications and the impact that it has in our relationships and on our everyday life. And long term, it definitely becomes a problem. And when I think about alcohol and its relationship in our culture, it's absolutely acceptable and accessible, and in a lot of ways it's promoted to be a part of our culture, to be a part of our everyday life. There's so many activities now that I think of, like paint and sip and art nights, and involving like alcohol in those things as well. So it's interesting because it's so embedded in our culture, and at the same time, when it comes to getting clean and not partaking in it, it's everywhere. And so I really, have sympathy and compassion for anyone that is trying to stop drinking, because it's literally in your face all the time. And it takes a lot of strength to make choices that align with not having it in your life and setting boundaries. And all the things that I talk about in my videos are things that need to come into play when we are stepping away from an addiction and into creating a new life for ourselves. So I wanted to talk about something that I would often talk about in the center I worked at, and that is this idea of relapse versus slips. And I think this is important because there's a lot of guilt and a lot of shame associated with relapse and slips. And I think for that reason, it's important to differentiate between the two. And my observation has been that when it comes to the rooms, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, everything is referred to as a relapse. So it's relapse, relapse, relapse. And I want to be clear that I am not trying to say that AA is wrong. I highly believe that AA is a supportive and helpful organization that provides community, instant fellowship, and the support that people need to get clean. And the thing is that in my everyday working at the treatment center, I noticed that there was a lot of worry and fear around, am I going to relapse? When I go to meetings, I hear people talking about relapse, relapse, relapse. And I'm worried that that's going to happen to me. And that was really what got me thinking about, is there a distinction here? And the previous treatment center that I worked at, they would always, make a distinction between a relapse and a slip. And I think this is really important. And I'll get into that as I talk more. So a relapse is going back to your highest level of usage or more. Whereas a slip is like a blip in the radar. It might be like having one beer and then realizing, oh my gosh, what have I done? I want to get back to being being sober. And if I haven't said it already, I want to be really clear that I do believe that abstinence is the way, but the journey to abstinence might involve slipping. And I think that's important. That's why this distinction is so important. So when it comes to relapse versus slips, I want to focus on the piece of slipping. And what does that actually mean? And so, as I just said, a slip is like a blip in the radar. But let's look at the slip in a different way. If you are on the path of recovery and on the path of abstinence, you've likely created a plan for yourself that involves a lot of the things that I talk about in my other videos. I've talked about self-care, I've talked about self-love, I talk about the things that contribute to self-care. And when you consider the things that are going to help you in your recovery, it's important to realize that there's the slip before the slip. In other words, things happen gradually and then suddenly. We may not notice that we're having stress or stressors in our life that are starting to degrade our strength and our foundation of self-care. And the point being that the slip happens long before the actual slip. So for example, if you have a self-care practice of, meditating, going to meetings, going to the gym, eating healthy, the slip before the slip is when you make the decision to not meditate, when you make the decision to go to McDonald's instead of eat healthy, when you make the decision to not call somebody when you're feeling stressed. Those are the things that we have control over, and those are the things that are so important when it comes to creating a foundation for ourselves. So the reason I like to have a distinction between a relapse and a slip is because there's the slip before the slip. And there's an expression that I love, which is things happen gradually and then suddenly. And slips and relapse are definitely falling into that category of there's things that happen way before the actual event that are contributing to the actual slip or the actual relapse. And it's important to shift that context. So why is this important ultimately on a level of emotions and feelings is that we are a culture that is really embedded in guilt and shame. And this is, in the Eastern philosophies, we talk about the lower chakras and coming up and healing those chakras as we open up our heart. And guilt and shame and fear are rooted in these lower chakras. And so this is part of our journey, is to overcome this fear, guilt, and shame that contributes to so many of our behaviors. And I believe that there's a distinction between a slip in the sense that slip is guilt. Guilt is I made a mistake, and shame is I am a mistake. And so it's really important to distinguish between those two because a slip does not bring on the emotions of shame. It might, but it doesn't need to. And slips are very much about learning from them, gaining the information, getting back on the bike, getting back to your foundational self-care practices that are going to help you to stay on the path of sobriety. And so, in other words, a slip is information. A slip is information about where we didn't have a strong foundation or where we might have missed something or where we're doing things that don't feel aligned. And that is why I think there should be a distinction between a slip and relapse. And relapse, if we talk about slips in the way of relapse, it just brings on another level of shame, which ultimately is usually, I believe, is the core of what it is we need to heal that would prevent us from stepping back into the addictive behaviors in the first place. So, and that's what comes back to all the videos that I've done in the past about different topics that relate to healing our emotional trauma. So it's kind of like this interesting piece about, looking at what is it that's going on under the surface that is contributing to the addiction which is happening on the surface. And so it's kind of like we spend so much in this life of trying to quickly fix something, and it's the equivalent of chopping off the top of the weed and not getting to the roots. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope that that gave you some food for thought and something to consider, and perhaps even lessen some of the emotions around this journey of sobriety and the journey of dealing with addiction, whatever that addiction might be. And so thank you so much for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like or subscribing. If you know someone that would benefit from this video, please share it. And if you are interested in the work that I do, you can visit my website. The address is in the description. And I look forward to seeing you again, sending you unconditional love.